Looks like we have a good group of people here. I wish I could see you all. Um, Feels a little bit like I am talking to Sarah and talking to, I believe you're all out there. But we just first want to say thank you all for being here today. We are looking forward to hearing what sort of questions you have and to talking a little bit about our direct democracy work. Um, I will just go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Gina Byrne. I use pronouns she and her, and I am the senior manager of BISC's Defend Direct Democracy campaign.
Hi, and I'm Sarah Walker, and I am also with BISC, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am the Director of Legal Policy Advocacy, and I'm really excited to be here with y'all, and I'm going to be turning it over to Gina and helping moderate the questions and be available for question and answer afterwards, but you are in good hands with Gina.
And just really briefly, before we get into it, for anyone who isn't familiar with BISC, BISC is a progressive nonprofit C3C4 that works with state-based partners on ballot initiatives, mostly statewide ballot initiatives. We are the oldest organization, ballot initiative organization. BISC has been around for about 25 years, and our pride is really in being rooted in the states and working closely with partners on individual measures. So that is a little bit about BISC. And now let's get into what we're all here to talk about. So ballot measures are a really important tool for change. I'm sure many of you are aware of that, but they help us achieve the kind of policy wins that are really needed in a lot of states. Our partners on the ground have expanded Medicaid, they've raised the minimum wage, extended voting rights to formerly disenfranchised voters, all through ballot measures. And these are not just your liberal bastions. If you see some of these headlines on the screen, we're talking about states like Arkansas, Nebraska, Missouri, where we see these really broad progressive policies being approved by voters in the state. We also know from extensive research conducted by BISC over the years that ballot initiatives are widely popular with voters across parties and political ideologies, that voters trust ballot initiatives more than other forms of lawmaking, and that voters feel really strongly that ballot initiatives are a good tool for making decisions on important issues that impact their lives. But, similarly to the way that we see restrictions on voting rights and access after we win at the ballot box, the response to progressive policy wins via ballot measures has been a coordinated attack on the process itself. In states across the country that have, specifically states that have a citizen initiative process, anti-democracy legislators have responded to these wins and anticipation of these wins by placing issues, by introducing bills that make it harder for proponents to place issues on the ballot and to pass them via initiatives. We know this playbook really well. As they become the minority and we become the majority, these attacks continue because we are talking about significant power that's at stake. We're really talking about the future of our states, the way we'll be able to fund our schools, major issues that are of great importance to us all. And, if you look at this chart, which, this year there were 164 bills introduced to impact the initiative process. We're anticipating more next year. We know that there has been a steady increase in these bills that would restrict the initiative process. But there is good news. We know, again, from our own research that voters, when they're educated on this issue, they are concerned across the board that the legislature would take actions to make initiatives harder to access for voters, harder to access for proponents. And these voters really showed that. They took this energy to the ballot box by voting down measures that would have restricted the initiative process in Arizona, Arkansas, and South Dakota. Um, in response to this challenge, BISC launched the Defend Direct Democracy campaign. Sometimes you'll hear us refer to it as the DDD campaign. We love alliteration. But we launched this campaign in 2021 to really be proactive about protecting the initiative process. Through this campaign, we have invested in a multi-year, multi-state research project with a really diverse group of researchers, different sorts of methods, different kinds of questions to get a comprehensive idea about how to talk to voters about these attacks on direct democracy. We leveraged significant resources to provide assistance to those working to defend direct democracy in their state legislatures and on the ballot box. And at the same time, we are simultaneously also thinking about the ways that we can expand access to direct democracy. So trying to get out of the position where we're always on defense and really thinking about places where we can protect and advance this right. On top of all of this, the fall of Roe and the absence of viable federal legislation to establish a right to abortion means that ballot initiatives play a really key role in the future of abortion access in our country. And it also very much colors and adds a lot of context to what we see now and what we will continue to see around attacks on the initiative process. We saw this just this past year in California and Michigan, where advocates collected signatures and passed measures enshrining the right to abortion in their state constitutions. This year, both Ohio and Florida began major signature collection efforts to do the same. In Ohio, advocates actually collected double the amount of signatures needed and submitted those to the Secretary of State. So we are celebrating that and also waiting in anticipation of those signatures being certified. While this tool is also really great when we're thinking about how we can protect abortion rights by putting language in state constitution, it also means that our opposition has become more broad. These campaigns to make the initiative process more restrictive are now receiving broader support and resources from the conservative right, with anti-abortion and religious organizations like Right to Life and the Family Policy Council contributing to efforts to stymie the initiative process because these laws allow voters to make important decisions about their bodily autonomy. Did I go backwards? I did. Oh, there we go. So again, as we saw on that prior slide, following kind of these major progressive wins that really started in 2016, if you ask older folks, people who have been voting for a long time, a lot of them think of the initiative process as something that was a tool used primarily by conservatives. But as we've seen a really big shift in the makeup of our state legislatures, we see a lot more progressive policies being passed via initiatives. So since 2016 or so, we've seen hundreds of bills introduced to alter and restrict the use of initiatives. These bills look like a lot of different things, but some of the most common policies are raising voter approval thresholds as high as 60%. And this year, we've seen legislation that would raise those thresholds even higher to the tune of 67%. Onerous signature requirements, including geographic distribution requirements that mandate circulators must collect signatures from each congressional or legislative district. Bills that would restrict who can collect signatures and how circulators can be compensated. Bills that would allow state legislatures to alter or completely repeal measures that have already passed. We have also, They want to introduce legislation to protect their ability to do that. And we also see state legislatures taking moves to deny implementation to measures. Famously, the Missouri legislature denied funding after Medicaid expansion, and there was a long process to get that program funded. And in Nebraska, just this past year, when voters passed a minimum wage increase, the legislature introduced legislation to create some significant carve outs for that measure. Subject limitations are also huge. A lot of states require that initiatives only have a single subject, which, even though they all kind of have this single subject requirement, what that actually means functionally is very different across the states. We also see subject limitations that dictate that initiatives cannot address certain topics. So, for example, prohibiting initiatives relating to land use or right to work laws. We also see changes to the process to certify ballot language and petition signatures that often tend to disadvantage proponents and create more opportunities for campaigns to be faced with costly legal challenges. And much, much more. There have been a lot of creative, I would say even some of them like silly on their face laws to attack this process, which shows that it's really not about reforming or addressing an issue. It's about the fact that these anti-democracy legislators who don't like what's being passed through the initiative process will take steps to make it harder for proponents, no matter what that looks like, no matter the costs to the state. So with that, we can talk a little bit about what we saw this session. Of the 164 bills introduced to alter the initiative process this year, the majority of these bills would make the process more restrictive and harder for proponents to use. Around 59 of these bills are marked as neutral. These bills consist of technical and conforming changes to the process, and then just 29 of these bills are changes to the initiative process that increase transparency and access and clarity for both proponents and voters. Just to do a little state of the states, because again, each state is very different in the way that they are attacking the process. The why is very different across states. So in Arkansas, a state wherein the legislature has tried to significantly restrict the process, referring measures to the ballot in both 2020 and 2022 that would increase the signature and voter approval thresholds respectively, and where voters rejected those measures in both 2020 and 2022. This year was no different. Governor Sarah Huckabee signed HB 1419, which her administration is referring to as the Voter Protection Act of 2023. This bill increased the number of counties from which circulators are able to gather signatures from, or to which circulators are required to gather signatures from 15 to 50, and remove the opportunity to cure or amend ballot initiatives that don't satisfy conditions for being added to the ballot when they are originally submitted. So ending that cure period. There's currently a lawsuit against this bill filed by the League of Women Voters of Arkansas and a Republican state senator on asserting that there are several ways wherein this bill actually violates the Arkansas Constitution. Most notably, the Arkansas Constitution very plainly says that 15 counties is the standard for signature collection. This bill also, it's a statutory bill, so they don't have to refer it out to a vote of the people, but it actually addresses constitutional language. So, it's really tricky in that way. We're hoping for a positive decision on that bill. Their state legislature also passed HB 1320, which would require the Attorney General's certification of ballot titles and summaries, which was formerly the process in Arkansas. After folks fought to get it changed over to a board of elections to be less politically influenced, and also because when that process lied with the AG's office, a lot of state advocates were citing significant delays in certification. It's also worth noting that the current AG of Arkansas is Tim Griffin, who's like a hardcore Karl Rove protege, and former employee of the RNC for many years. So that comes at an interesting time. In California, in the context of ballot initiatives, California is like truly the Wild West. I'm a native Californian. There are always, many, many initiatives to vote on any given ballot. And despite being a state with a steep blue majority, California is famous for passing really regressive policy through the initiative process, and economically redistributive, such a hard word to say, measures that are typically very popular in other states actually pass in California at the lowest rate in the country. A lot of this can be attributed to the fact that in recent history, California initiatives have involved some of the wealthiest industries in America, really in the world. Big tobacco, bail bondsmen, the plastic industries, major tech companies like Uber and Lyft, who have really gotten into the initiative process and are able to use their money, to one, set completely like exponentially raise the standards of how much we're spending on initiatives. Also they tend to use a lot of disinformation around some of these campaigns, and they are well resourced to do so. So in California, voters and proponents alike have both identified a real need for reform. This year, AB 421 was introduced. The original text of that measure would require that at least 10% of signatures would need to be from volunteers in order for any measure to qualify. We're talking about a really populous state. While this would make it harder for corporations, this would also create significant roadblocks for all kinds of proponents who would be required to collect around 100,000 valid signatures using only volunteers, which is honestly unheard of. And while this bill is meant to address something that we, at least as BISC, see as a real problem and something that is worth exploring, steps to make the initiative process, the actual process, harder. If it makes it harder for corporations, it will certainly make it harder for our grassroots partners who are not as well resourced to do the work that they need to do. This bill has since been amended and no longer includes a signature requirement. It will now require the top funders of any effort to be listed on the actual petition, and on the ballot itself, should it go to a vote. It also simplifies the language used on a ballot so that voters have a better understanding of if they're voting, affirmatively for something, or is it a veto? This bill with these new changes is certainly one that we at BISC support, because it raises that awareness for voters, and increases clarity for ballot initiatives that can often be very confusing. Florida. So Florida is the state that currently has the highest standard for the passage of constitutional amendments in the country. This session, again, is no different. They faced several attacks on the process. Two failed bills, HB 41 and SB 856, would have prohibited citizen-initiated measures related to land use. And they would retroactively invalidate measures relating to land use that have passed since June of 2011. These two bills, despite how sweeping they are and the major sort of impact that they have, are statutory and do not need voters' approval. Again, these two bills failed, but in Florida, we see these same sorts of policies being brought up year after year. There were also two other bills introduced in Florida that also failed, a House and Senate version, HB 129 and SJR 1410, that would actually raise that constitutional amendment threshold from 60% to almost 67%, which would create a new standard for the whole entire country, and is very, very high. Most measures on these sorts of major issues do not cross that sort of threshold. So it would make it very hard for measures to pass. Missouri. So Missouri has long been the epicenter for attacks on the initiative process, with Republicans in the state legislature, session after session, introducing 20 or so bills to restrict the process. These bills have failed every session. Again, after 5 consecutive sessions of these bills being introduced, trying to make numerous changes, we've seen, them try to raise the threshold, to raise the standard for signature collection, to change who can collect signatures. They really run the gamut of restrictive ballot measure policy. This year, Missouri legislators failed to pass HJR 43, which went through several iterations during the session. The version that ended up dying would have raised the threshold to 57%, which was amended down from 60, but it would have required a concurrent majority, so that if a measure, for a measure to be passed, it would need to also be passed in 22 of the counties in the state, which I believe is just a majority of the counties in the state, which again is not the sort of policy we see in other states. There's not a real precedent for that kind of initiative process law. So we see them trying all sorts of things to just get something to pass, to go to voters. So again, these bills are often not about addressing a problem. They're really about throwing something to the wall and seeing what sticks, because the end goal is just making it harder for people to use this process. Additionally, something that's, I think, really important to talk about with this Missouri bill is that there was language at the beginning of the bill that, quote, shall the Missouri Constitution be amended to allow only citizens of the United States to qualify as legal voters, which is already existing law. This language was put into this law. It was often referred to on the ground as ballot candy, something to hook in more voters who may not actually support the policy on its face, but instead it stokes racism and xenophobia to gather more votes. So, that bill was incredibly problematic in many different ways. And Missouri, we're certain will continue to be on our radar as far as restrictive legislation that's introduced to impact the initiative process. The last state I will speak about is Mississippi. Mississippi's initiative process was actually struck down in 2021 after the state Supreme Court ruled that the entire initiative process was invalid because of a technicality over the number of congressional districts. For 2 sessions in a row, Mississippi legislators have, all they would need to do is a simple fix on the language related to congressional districts in order to restore the initiative process. And instead, legislators have taken this opportunity to significantly water down the initiative process, attempt to raise the threshold, to restrict the kinds of policies that could be introduced through it, or that could be introduced through initiatives. So, prohibiting initiatives that deal with right to work laws, prohibiting amendments of the state's abortion laws, as well as prohibiting any dedication of revenue, um, in addition to many other things that made this process so bad and really would not have provided for a process that's very functional for folks in state. And again, it would be a significant watering down of the process that the state once had. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm just going to go quickly here. So these are a few of the measures that we see on the ballot in 2024, and we anticipate more coming up. I'll just touch on Arizona. So this is a legislatively referred measure in Arizona, and the Arizona legislature actually only needs a simple majority to put these measures on the ballot, anything legislatively referred. So, the Republicans in Arizona have a really slim majority right now, but they can still put these measures on the ballot and they're not subject to the governor's veto. So we are certain that we will see other probably not so favorable legislatively referred amendments on the ballot in 2024. In addition to this measure that you see here, there's also a measure that would prohibit ranked choice voting that's going to the ballot in 2024. California, a measure, this is a citizen-initiated measure, but I hesitate to say citizen-initiated because this measure is backed by the State Chamber of Commerce and funded by the Commercial Real Estate Development Association in the state and several other really wealthy special interest groups who I think, probably want to, in some ways, get out of paying their fair share in California. And they would require, it would create significant delays in funding important programs for communities, schools, parks, roads, our public goods that are funded through taxes. If to create a new tax, these measures have to go through these, extreme measures, receiving 67% of the vote to be enacted, requiring that 2/3 of legislators pass any new taxes, and then they go to a vote. This would just create significant delays in funding those programs. So that's something that's on our radar. And then in North Dakota, there is a measure referred out from the legislature that would establish a single subject rule. It would increase the signature requirement. It would also require that you have to pass measures twice. So in the primary and in the general, I will just flag on this one. So the legislature has tried to do this already. In 2020, the legislature referred a very similar measure to the ballot. It was defeated by over 60% of the vote. And I think it's worth noting that measure 2, was especially unpopular among the state's Republicans. No votes were the most densely populated in the most strongly Republican precincts in the state. So, this is not a partisan issue. Voters are really not fond of these attempts to make the initiative process harder. And again, across political ideologies, voters support this idea that citizens can directly collect petition signatures, put an issue on the ballot, and put it up for a vote of the people. So the last thing I will talk about here today is Ohio. Many folks, I'm sure, are aware of what's going on in Ohio. Ohio Republicans passed SJR 2 on party lines after attempting to pass a House version of the bill during the state's lame duck session last year. This measure would increase the voter approval threshold to 60%, among other things, requiring that signatures be collected from each county of the state. The thing that's really important to talk about when talking about SJR 2 is that, this measure was put before on the ballot specifically to preempt a proactive abortion rights measure that will be on the ballot in November. Currently, the folks really putting money behind the effort for issue 1 are anti-abortion advocates. And the state also sanctioned having this issue be decided on August 8th during a special election after they had actually voted to scrap August elections in the state, citing them as being overly expensive, low turnout endeavors that weren't worth the trouble. So this is on the ballot. Issue 1 is on the ballot August 8th. One thing that is really positive about this is that we've seen some recent tracking polling that was conducted by the No on Issue 1 campaign that has them up by 10 points. Again, when you explain to voters in a simple way, call into question the motivations of legislators who are attempting to make the process harder, voters across the board oppose these sorts of measures. I'm just going to skip here really quickly. So we have this tried and true. We've put a lot of effort into what you see here, and there is extensive research beyond this, but there is kind of a 3-part formula to how we should be talking about these measures with voters, how we should be talking about them with constituents. And the important thing is that you educate on the purpose that ballot initiatives serve. You don't need to talk about the whole process of how you qualify, but again, really letting people know the purpose that ballot initiatives serve, this idea of direct democracy, that it's a tool that people can use for decision making. You want to explain and call into question the motivations of those looking to restrict the process. And you always want to engage at the end with an uplifting message about our ability to protect direct democracy. And, we know that that's helpful outside of the dome, but there are a lot of things that need to happen in order to be effective on this issue under the dome. And I would say if you have any questions about bills that you see coming up, please get in contact with us. We aim to have resources that are easy for you to use about all of these issues that we talked about here today. As much as possible, legislators and stakeholders, if you can be a role player in supporting ballot measure campaigns, especially through implementation, that is huge. And as much as possible, we really want to reframe attacks on the initiative process as being a part of the broader fight to protect democracy from authoritarianism in our country. So those are our calls to action. I would say first and foremost, please get in touch with us. We want to be a resource. I'm sure my email I can share in the chat or something, and Sarah's. And with that, I believe we have some time for questions. I'm gonna watch the chat. Love to see some folks working on Medicaid expansion. That's awesome. We would love to get in touch with folks working in South Dakota. Happy to take any questions that folks have. I see some familiar names in here. Hey, Amanda. So, okay. If we have no more questions, I can go ahead and hop off. But Thank you all so much for being here. I'll just put my email in the chat one more time. Um, please feel free to reach out. We would love to talk to you and to hear about what you're doing. And I hope you'll have a great rest of your day.